Hello and welcome to Nutrient Nirvana. Today we're doing a video with a difference. This video is in direct response to some of Ralph's critics and in particular a video that came out on YouTube a couple of days ago. Ralph, what were your thoughts on that in general?
Yeah, it was interesting, wasn't it? It was not a critique as such. It was another attempted takedown. And I've had this before. When my Odessa book first came out, there was a coordinated attack upon that book by a diverse range of people, from Mormons to fundamentalist Christians to people who claimed to be mythicists. But they were all operating together in order to take down this book, as if this book was threatening to them in some fashion. And we've just had the same again from a different coordinated quartet of researchers and YouTube presenters. It was odd, wasn't it? It was a very strange. I mean, for instance, they didn't invite me on, of course. This is a critique of my books. And you would have thought, if they were trying to get to some sort of truth, historical truth, about this matter, about the Odessa gospel theory, you'd have thought they might invite me onto the show, to ask me a few questions. But no, that wasn't the intention, was it? I think you probably got this idea as well, that it was designed to take me down and therefore take down the theory with it. But as I don't think these tactics work, because it looks like children bullying somebody in the playground, and we've had this in culture over the last few years. With the general cancel culture that we've had, whether it's climate, vaccines, lockdowns, gender, Marxism, whatever it is. This cancel culture it's all about power, really, isn't it? It's not really to get to the truth. They just want to shout you down, and they want to cancel you, so that nobody can debate with the ideas they have on climate, vaccines, lockdowns, Marxism, whatever. You're not allowed to have an opinion. They shout you down, they cancel you. And that's pretty much what they tried to do with this video.
Yeah.
So they weren't looking for truth whatsoever.
Well, I would actually go one stage further than that and suggest that this wasn't just an attack on your thesis. It was an attack on your character as well, at times anyway. And
Yes.
for me, that's unforgivable. There's no excuses for that at all. And so we need to address all the many points that were raised in that video, which we're going to do now. So, Ralph, shall we start with the epistles? Were the epistles written before or after the Jewish Revolt?
Well, of course, in classical history, the crucifixion comes first, and then the epistles, and then the Jewish Revolt. I mean, that's classical sort of Christianity. With the Odessa theory, I've changed that chronology slightly, because I say that Jesus' character was crucified in AD 70 after the Jewish Revolt. So I have epistles, then crucifixion. Now, they took exception to this because they said, well, how can you have the epistles first? Surely, like Barman himself, he's moved the epistles into the AD 70s, which I think is untenable, to try and get around his perceived problem. And the perceived problem is that the epistles mention the crucifixion and the resurrection before it has happened in my chronology. But we're going to discuss this, I think, maybe in another question later on. I don't think that's true. If you go through the epistles, they don't really mention anything to do with the resurrection and the crucifixion. They have sporadic mentions, which I'll talk about later, which are not a description at all of the crucifixion events. So all that big drama that you know from your school Christianity lessons about Jesus being tried, being found guilty, having to carry the cross and getting scourged, and then put upon the cross, and all of the events at the cross with his family around, and the spear and the sponge, and being taken down early and put into all of that great drama is not present in the epistles. Mm-hmm. And that's odd, because if Saul had been going around the Mediterranean in the 50s, as he probably was, and standard Christianity also says he was, you would have thought he would have been telling that tale all across the Mediterranean to everyone he could tell it to. Because part of the idea of Saul, of course, was he wanted the cash. You can see that in the epistles. He's always asking for money. What better way would there have been to get even more cash than tell this tragic tale of his hero savior being crucified? He would have been telling that story to everybody, and he doesn't. And so that's why I think that they are wrong, right? The epistles came first. They don't mention the crucifixion and resurrection in any detail whatsoever. And we'll have a look at this again in a minute. And then why do they not mention it? Well, because the crucifixion was later. It was after the Jewish Revolt, 20 years later in AD 70.
Okay, thanks, Ralph. So shall we just move on quickly to Thea Musa of Arania? Did Cleopatra have another child? Shall we start with that?
Yes. Yes, she did, although they were debating this, and I don't like the way they say, he's wrong. They're not saying, well, actually, there is a possibility he's right. Let's debate this. Let's have a discussion about whether she might have had another surviving child or not. It's just, he's wrong because I say he's. This is a typical Valiantism. Valiant was one of the guys who was making these criticisms. I say it's this, therefore you must believe me, and therefore he's wrong. But I don't think his argument stood up whatsoever. So Valiant, he agrees that Cleopatra was pregnant when she fled from Rome when Caesar was assassinated. So she was pregnant. And he says, well, how on earth do we know that this was a girl? Because I say the child was a girl. Well, it doesn't take much thought to understand why she must have been a girl. What Cicero feared was a scion of Caesar, an heir to Caesar, and only a boy could be an heir to the Roman Empire. But later on, Cicero is happy that the problem's gone away. And so you've only got two options, really. Either this was a stillborn, or it was a girl. And that's why the problem went away. So there's a good reason for thinking that Cleopatra had another girl. She was pregnant. There was a problem with that pregnancy, political problem, not not a physical problem, as Valiant says. There was a political problem with that pregnancy, and then the problem went away. Why did it go away? Because it was a girl, and a girl could not become the next emperor. And he went on. What did he went on to say that Thea Musa Aurania had name, therefore. If this daughter became eventually Queen Thea Musa Aurania, as I say in my books, she has the wrong name, because she would have been named after Caesar, because Caesar would have been her father. So she would have been named Julia or something of that nature, or maybe one of the other Caesarian names, perhaps. But no, she was called Thea Musa Aurania. But that doesn't necessarily mean I'm wrong. Yes, in normal circumstances, you would call her Julia. But Cicero was afraid of a scion of Caesar, not of a scion of Cleopatra. And so, of course, he wouldn't want her to inherit the name of Julius Caesar, because he wanted to divorce this child from Julius Caesar completely, because of the problem of inheritance, like the fact that Caesarion suddenly disappeared. Caesarion was one of the other sons of Cleopatra, and he conveniently disappeared at this very time. So he couldn't become the next emperor. Clearly, there was a political problem here, and so the daughter would not have been called Julia at all, and she was called Thea Aurania. And I don't know if he knows this. It seemed as though he didn't know what Thea Aurania was. Thea Aurania was one of the muses of Greece. She was the muse of the heavens. Therefore, she was the queen of heaven. Well, the muse of heaven. But anyway, let's treat her as the queen of heaven. Therefore, she is Isis, an incarnation of Isis, as many of these queens were back into Judaic history. And so that's a perfectly logical name. She was an incarnation of Isis. She was Thea Aurania. So it's a perfectly fitting name.
Well, Valiant was absolutely adamant that, if Thea Aurania was the daughter of Cleopatra, we would know about it. We would know about it, he said. Now, this reminded me of a documentary I saw on Channel 4, probably the best part of 10 years ago now, I think. And in that documentary, it featured close relatives of our incumbent queen that nobody knows about. These people were born with some form of abnormality or disability, and they've been shunned away out of the private eye. So this sort of thing, even to this day, goes on.
Yes. I forgot about that. Yes, that was quite a shocker when that came out, because nobody in the entire country knew anything about it.
Yep.
And suddenly there were I think there was at least two in mental institutions that had been stuck in mental institutions, and no one had really visited them, like for 50 years or something. And they were completely unknown. So if that can happen in the sort of, that would have been in the 20th century, then of course it could have happened during the Roman era. Of course it would happen. Well, except for the fact that Cicero would have written a letter to Valiant, that's for sure. He would have got a letter directly from Cicero, because he knows everything.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that was alleged was that you've made this link purely based on the noses of two busts.
Oh yes, which I didn't. And yeah, I thought that was one of these ridiculous comments from. It was Barman that made this comment, and then the rest of them all joined in, laughing. As they were laughing away, not knowing what they were laughing at, because they've obviously not read this part of my book. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been laughing. They would have challenged Barman and said, "No, that's not what Ellis said at all." Of course, I'm not linking Thea Aurania and Cleopatra based on a nose. There's lots of literary evidence between the two, but what I was saying in my book is that their busts look very similar. So if I can manage to do a screen share, now how do we do this? We do it with Window, I think, and we click there and share. Right, now can you see that?
Yep.
Okay.
It's on screen.
So on the left, well, it's on the left as I look it. I don't know which way round it is on the screen, because I can't see your screen when I do this. But anyway, the lady without the hat, obviously that hat would have had something around it. I mean, that's not how it would have looked. The lady without the hat is Cleopatra. And that's from the British Museum, that particular bust. And the lady on the right is Queen Thea Aurania of Parthia. and that comes from the Iranian Museum. It was stolen actually during, I better not say anymore because I'm not sure. Is it the Iranian Museum or the Iraqi Museum? I'll have to look it up. I can't remember. Anyway, it's over in the Middle East, and it's in one of the museums in the Middle East. And that is Thea Museum with the hat that would have had something around the top of it, like gold bands or something. I don't know. And the question is, do those two ladies look similar? Never mind the nose. We're not discussing noses here. Do those two busts look similar? And I would say, yes, they do. The entire facial shape is rather similar, I would say. Perhaps readers can and viewers can write in and make a comment and say, you know, what they think about these two. But I think this is further proof that Cleopatra and Thea Musa were related. And of course, I'm saying that Thea Musa was the daughter of Cleopatra. So what do you think? Do they think they look?
I think obviously yes. I mean, it's fairly obvious that they look extremely similar. The only question at the back of my mind with regards to this is that due to the style that was popular at the time, if you like, you know?
Well, I've compared them to a number of other busts because obviously the British Museum is stuffed full of busts. And I would say that this is a unique sort of facial type with that sort of receding sort of chin, sort of a weak looking chin. That it's not simply a style. I mean, the hair is, of course, the hair is a style. You'll see that style on many Roman women and Near Eastern women. But the facial features, no, I don't think so. And someone else made a comment that these were not contemporary. You know, how can you compare busts that were, you know, made hundreds of years later? That's not true. As far as we know, both of these busts are contemporary. So they were made at the time that these ladies lived.
Wow.
And so this is a direct comparison. As long as the sculptor is, you know, is good at his art, this is a good comparison between these two individuals. So yeah, we have a lot of textual information that they may be related, and now we get a bust. And then we get their subsequent lives as well, of them both being successful and influential queens who ruled on their own. I mean, this is a powerful line of women who used to rule on their own quite a lot, whether it was Cleopatra, whether it was Thea Musa Orania, whether it was Queen Helena that we're going to talk about later, who was probably a daughter of this lady here, or even if we go up to, you know, Julia Domna, who was hugely dominant in Roman politics with her nephews, I think they were, Elagabalus and so on, and up to Queen Zenobia, the famous Queen of Palmyra, who tried to become Empress of Rome. A line of powerful queens, and they're all sort of vaguely related between all of them. It's a story that really needs telling in a separate book about, you know, the powerful queens of the East. So maybe that's a project for another day. So let me unshare the screen. Oh, you've done it. There we go. Okay, marvelous.
Brilliant. Okay. Next question or next thing that's come up is connected to King Agbarus of Odessa. Who was the mother of King Agbarus?
Yes, that was Augustina. And I can't imagine what the problem was. This was Valiant again having a problem. And I think he's arguing from a position of ignorance, because it can be difficult when you're in an interview situation and someone throws a question at you and you haven't revised that particular that particular subject, that you don't necessarily know. And sometimes it's better to just say, sorry, I don't know. I'll get back to you with an answer later, because although I know this subject, I don't know everything. I mean, I've written 2,000 pages on this subject, so you tend to forget little bits and pieces. But I think he was arguing from a position of ignorance. He was saying that the name has to be anachronistic and put back into the past. So just to be clear, it's not me that's saying that the mother of Abgarus, King Abgarus of Odessa, that his mother was called Augustina. That was not me. That was in the Doctrine of Adai, I think. So it's in one of the original manuscripts. Doctrine of Adai, even that goes back to the like entry. So it's not my claim. It's the Doctrine of Adai. And the question then becomes, is this a realistic name, or is it an anachronistic name? And of course, from my point of view, if I'm saying that King Abgarus of Odessa was the son of Queen Thea Musa-Aurania, the lady we've just looked at in the bust, then this would make perfect sense. And I don't see why he would argue against it, because the patron of Queen Thea Musa-Aurania was Emperor Augustus. And so all we're saying here is that, well, not I'm saying, this is the Doctrine of Adai saying, is that she took the name of her patron, as many people did. Just a couple of examples. Claudia was the daughter of King Caracatus, the British king. Now, she took her name from Emperor Claudius because he was her patron, as it were. And Josephus Flavius, the famous historian, well, he took his name from the Flavian emperors because he was working for the Flavians during their lifetime. I mean, this is, you don't have to do it, retrospectively after they've died, posthumously. You can do it at the time while they're still alive. And this happened all the time. So I'm not entirely sure what the point was, really. But I mean, that's why I should have been on the show, because if maybe there was a point. But of course, now he can't ask me and come back to me and say, well, the point was this. Well, you could have done that if I was invited on the show, but sorry, chums, you burnt your boats. So this is my answer to your stupid assessment. But there we go.
Okay, thanks, Ralph. Next question or thing that came up was when Josephus Flavius went over to the Romans, was he a slave or was he a Roman army commander?
Yeah, this is a misapprehension by Sendlak, who was another of these commentators. He's a YouTube presenter, Sendlak, and he has a number of obsessions which aren't really based upon logic. I mean, he's just decided that something must be so, and he'll keep arguing that it must be so in spite of all of the evidence against it. And he has been saying for quite some time that Josephus Flavius was a slave of Emperor Vespasian. And of course, I say something completely different in my books. So I think he's under a complete misapprehension, and he won't change his mind. And then he complains about me and saying, I'm wrong, Therefore, all of his books are wrong because he's got this little bit wrong. Well, I don't think it's wrong at all, because quick potted history of Josephus. During the Jewish Revolt, he was working for the Jewish authorities as the army commander in command of Galilee. He fought against the Romans, and he fought them at the Battle of Jotapata, which is in Galilee, and he lost that siege and he surrendered to the Romans. And then the question is, what happened to him after he surrendered? Well, according to Josephus himself, he was sent into prison. But when he surrendered to Vespasian, it did seem from their conversations that they knew each other previously. This is why I've said that Josephus had been working for Vespasian as a spy before the Jewish Revolt, because they seemed to know each other. But anyway, he went to jail, and then he was released when they went down towards the siege of Jerusalem, which would have started, I suppose, in AD 69. He was released from prison, and he became a Roman army commander in charge of Judaic propaganda. So he became the propaganda officer for the Roman army, trying to get the rebels to surrender in Jerusalem, giving all of these marvelous speeches. Well, he says he was anyway. You never know with Josephus. He's not entirely trustworthy. So, no, he was not a slave. He was working for the Romans, and he seemed to be able to go about his business as a normal Roman officer, obviously under command of his commanding officer, whoever that was. But after the Jewish revolt ended, Josephus was given lands, money, wealth. He was given the holy books from the temple, the Torah and the Tanakh from the temple. And he was allowed by Titus, he was allowed to free as many of his relatives and his former compatriots as he liked, and to restore them to their previous wealth and their previous lands. Now, that's not the position of a slave, that he can own lands and wealth himself, and set up his own scriptorium, because he then became the chief scribe to Vespasian, writing all of these books for him, but also to release all of his family and so on, and restore them to their lands. That's not the position of a slave. So no, Josephus was never a slave. He was a prisoner for a bit, but he was never a slave to Vespasian and Titus.
Mm-hmm. Great.
I was just going to continue a little bit actually on that one, just a couple of minutes. This is sort of important because his position after the Jewish revolt is rather pivotal. And again, lots of people deny this. I say he had a great deal of influence over what happened after this, because a lot of things changed at this time. Temple Judaism stopped, and we had rabbinic Judaism. The roast sacrifice for the Jews, that stopped. That doesn't happen in modern synagogues. There's no queues of chickens and sheep outside the synagogue waiting to be roasted. All of that changed. And we had a new religion. Christianity was created at this time. The world changed religiously and socially at this time. And Josephus, especially if he is related to Saul, as I say in my book, was central all of these changes. And of course, he wasn't doing all of these major changes to Western culture and civilization as a slave. He was doing it as a freedman, working, obviously subservient to and working for the Flavian emperors, but doing their bidding as a, I was going to say a valued member of the Flavian court, but I don't think anyone valued Josephus at all. I mean, he was a slimy, horrible, egotistical character, and I'm sure they only suffered him because he was useful. But that aside, he was still fairly influential.
Fantastic. Moving on, did Augustus Octavian have Parthia under his thumb?
No. More propaganda again. Josephus was not the only one putting out propaganda. The Romans were rather good at it too. They're still good at it in the 21st century. We see propaganda left, right, and center on our televisions every night. The Romans were no different. There was a hell of a load of propaganda going around, which is why you have to be so careful reading these history books. Because if you read someone like Josephus, he's 50% history and he's 50% propaganda. And you have to read through that propaganda to see what he's talking about. I mean, the propaganda is true as well, but of course it's propagandized. It's all put into a positive Roman spin on the story. And so, no, when they met, this is all about a meeting between Augustus and Frates IV. There would have been of Parthia. I think it would have been Frates. Oh no, it might have been an earlier one. Anyway, one of the kings of Parthia. I can't remember exactly which one. And yes, no, it would have been Frates IV. Yeah, of course it would have been. And they met on an island in the center of the Euphrates. And of course, the Romans say that Frates came and he bent the knee to the emperor and all of this, and he was subservient to the Roman emperor. But of course, that's not true at all. The subsequent events in Parthia show that it's not true. For instance, Augustus set up the Odessan royal family as a buffer state between Rome and Parthia. They wouldn't have needed this buffer state between the two empires if Rome had full control over Parthia, as Senlac was trying to intimate. And of course, they had later wars. They had the 58 war with Parthia, and then Hadrian, who had expanded out a little bit, he had to retreat back to the Euphrates in the early 2nd century. So of course, they hadn't defeated Parthia at all. This is all propaganda. And you have to be able to read through that propaganda when you're assessing this history. And it looks like some of these alternative historians are unable to do that. They cannot differentiate the history from the propaganda. They take it all so literally sometimes when it shouldn't be read like that at all.
Absolutely. Was the Jewish revolt an internal Jewish dispute?
No, it wasn't. I think this was a contention by Valiant, who was trying to intimate that I was wrong to involve the Odessan royal family in the Jewish revolt, because this was a Jewish revolt, and so it was internal between the Jews. It was a civil war between the Jews. Well, he's wrong on many counts. First of all, the Odessan royal family were Jewish, and I'm not sure he even knows that. But we have a lot of information on that. The Talmud says that they were Jewish. They were proselytes, so they converted to Judaism. Josephus says that they were converting to Judaism. He has whole chapters on this conversion process to convert the Odessan Adiabeni royal family to Judaism. And in my books, the Acts of the Apostles has the same story, with the Jerusalem Council and all of the events of that, and Peter and Saul going up to Antioch, Odessa, and then going backwards and forwards talking about circumcision, just as Josephus was talking about circumcision. This is all the same story about introducing Judaism to the Odessan Adiabeni royal family. And Josephus says that they did become Jews. Well, the Talmud says the same. Queen Helena became a Jew, a Nazarene Jew, no less, the same as Jesus. So yeah, he's wrong, because of course they were Jewish, and therefore they had an interest in Judea. I mean, this was the family who had the largest palace and the largest tomb in Jerusalem. Of course they were connected with Judea. And then at the outbreak of the Jewish revolt, it clearly says that these members of this royal family were the people who started the Jewish revolt. We might discuss this later, but the Jewish revolt started when the Legion of Cestius was destroyed by the Jews. But of course, it wasn't just the Jews. Josephus Flavius says that the most valiant in the battle against Cestius were the kinsmen of Monobazus, king of Adiabeni, and their names were Monobazus and Chenadius. Right. Okay. So the kings and princes of Adiabeni were pivotal in the start of the Jewish revolt when the legion of Cestius was destroyed and defeated. And of course, the kings of Adiabeni are the kings of Odessa. We know that because the queen of Adiabeni was the queen of Odessa, the famous Queen Helena. So there are many links between the two. So I think that this Jewish revolt was more led and influenced by the Adiabeni Odessa royal family than it was an internal dispute within Judea, although they did use the ongoing problems in Judea as a method of fomenting this revolt. I mean, every revolt needs some rationale to go ahead and do it. You know, it's like America could not attack Japan until they were attacked themselves at Pearl Harbor. So they had to sort of engineer, as it were, that attack on Pearl Harbor before they had the possibility of going back and attacking Japan. It's the same thing. You've got to have some rationale before you start declaring war on people. Otherwise, you're not going to carry your people with you. As as Mr. Putin is finding out, I like to always bring this history up to date because, you know, they always say it's from history that you learn current events and how to avoid them. And that's just a perfect example. You know, here's dear old Putin going to war without a clear rationale for his military to follow. And many of them went across the border, not even knowing that they'd gone across the border. Oh, it's like you're in Ukraine now, chaps. Off you go. Go and fight this person and kill him. Well, why am I killing this guy? Well, because I told you to. Yeah. And so that leads to a very, very poor response from your military because they have no clear idea about why they're going to war and why they should be doing this. And that is what all of these tensions and so on in Judea were about. They were about setting the scene for generating this Jewish revolt, which had a higher rationale behind it, which only the royal family knew about. And we might discuss that later.
Yeah, brilliant, Ralph. Thanks. Now, Mr. Ralph Ellis, you stand accused of.
I'm accused of everything.
On this particular occasion, you stand accused of claiming to be a descendant of Elijah.
Yeah, I thought this was crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. This one was odd because it was not only crazy, it was a direct lie. And this just shows that this attack on me in this video was nothing to do with history. This was all about an attack on me, either because they hate me or because they hate the Odessa gospel theory. I have a feeling it's the latter, but I can't prove it. For some reason, they have a visceral hatred of both myself and the Odessa theory. And in this case, as I say, it was a direct lie. What happened is I was having a to and fro in sort of emails, as it were, on Messenger with one of these guys, with Sendlak. And one of the questions, just for no apparent reason, he said, where was your name? Where did your name come from? Ellis. And I said, Ellis comes from the biblical Elias, so they say, and some say it comes from Dido, the queen of Phoenicia, because I don't know if you know, but Dido was called Ellis. And that is what, I mean, if you look up names, I mean, there's loads of these dictionaries of, you know, dictionary of surnames and so on. If you look up Ellis in a dictionary of surnames, it says this name was descended from Elijah or Elias. That's just what it says. And he says that I'm trying to claim a descent from Elijah. Oh, it's just an utter fabrication, but it's not only a nonsense, it's a very sinister nonsense. You're trying to lie deliberately in order to denigrate
Well,
someone.
there were several distortions and misrepresentations of what you've written and said,
Mm,
which is why I felt very strongly that this had to be countered.
mm,
Anyway, let's move on. Let's move on to the prophecy of Emmanuel. So,
mm.
what was going on with this prophecy, Ralph? How would you explain
Um, so the prophecy of Emmanuel, I don't know if people remember this, but famous prophecy from the New Testament, Matthew 1:23. It says, if I remember correctly, a virgin shall be with child, and she will bring forth a son, and they will call his name Emmanuel. And for some reason, these critics took exception to this and said I was misusing it, and that, what were they saying about this? It cannot be used as a name for an Odessan king because it comes from the Old Testament. That because I link this name up with one of the Odessan kings who's called Manu. And they were disputing this because it comes from the Old Testament, of course. It comes from Isaiah 7:14, which says pretty much exactly the same, so I won't repeat it. And this was odd because it was a criticism of my book, but it displayed the fact that these people didn't understand how Pesha works, how these prophecies are made. It was almost as if they were believing it was a real prophecy. So someone can actually really prophesy the future, which I found bizarre. But anyway, what a Pesha is, and this is used throughout the Talmud especially, is a method of biblical prophecy. You get a scribe who knows his Old Testament, and they run through the Old Testament looking for similar events or similar names, similar people. And once you've found that and you read the verse that is appropriate to them, you can maybe use that verse to align that verse with contemporary events, modern events, and from that you might be able to divine the future, based, I suppose, on the idea that the past repeats itself. If you find a similar passage in the past, maybe exactly the same is going to happen again in the future. So that is how they work Pesha. So of course you can link up this Pesha prophecy with the Odessan royal family. So what I think has happened here, of course, is they had this Odessan royal name, which is Manu. And so the scribe went back through the Old Testament looking for a name that was similar to Manu, that could be linked up to this, birth and gospel story, the nativity story. And they found Isaiah 7:14, which said, "Oh, a virgin will conceive and bear a son, and his name will be called Emmanuel," virtually the same name. And so they can use this and stuff it into the New Testament, and it can serve as a prophecy, but it's a stupid prophecy because Jesus was never called Emmanuel. So it is a prophecy with no meaning and no rationale. Unless, of course, you know that Jesus was connected with the kings of Odessa. And if someone whispers into your ear and says, King of Odessa, okay, now the prophecy makes sense because Jesus was called Emmanuel. He was called King Emmanuel. He was King Manu the sixth of Odessa. So I think this has been used as a way of concealing the fact that Jesus was connected to this Odessan royal family. So I'm not really sure. I mean, they can disagree with that and say, oh, no, we don't think that's what the prophecy was doing. But please don't say it's impossible. It's entirely possible.
As far as I'm aware, Ralph, you're the only person I know of that's given a very plausible explanation for that prophecy.
Yeah, because it's a meaningless prophecy. It has no meaning in the New Testament. Yeah. Jesus was never called Emmanuel. So it's a complete and utter nonsense unless you know they're connected with Odessa. So it's a good explanation. And you've got to remember with these explanations, if you take this in isolation, if this was my only proof, you would say, well, that's not very good. You must be off your rocker to imagine that as a proof that Jesus was connected with Odessa. It is not one simple, single piece of evidence. This is one of 400 pieces of evidence that, if you fit them all together, make into a cohesive whole. And that's why I think it's a true explanation, because it's not in isolation. It's one little piece of evidence among many pieces.
Fantastic. Here's a nice, easy one for you. How do we know that the testimonium Flavinum is an interpolation?
Yeah. How do we not? It's so obviously an interpolation. It's untrue. For readers who have not come across it, there's a little passage in the works of Josephus where suddenly, for no apparent reason, Josephus says that Jesus was really a really nice man. And he did all these wonderful things, and he was like almost a son of God and all this. And you think, well, hold on a minute, this is completely out of place. This is not how Josephus writes his texts.
And it's completely out of context, isn't it, with what precedes it and follows it. It's just yes. Where's this come from?
Yeah, if you took it out, the sentences would join up, the paragraphs would join up perfectly. So it's been stuck in the middle of otherwise cohesive sentences and paragraphs. So it's obviously an interpolation. It's not in his style. There is no context to it. He never describes this person before or after. So it's not a part of a continuing story about this Jesus character. It's an interpolation. And there's also a problem that many of the early church fathers don't mention it. And so it's not mentioned, I think, until Eusebius. Anyway, there are several church fathers that don't mention this. And of course, if it had been in there, they would have been jumping all over it and saying, look, evidence for our Jesus. I mean, even the Gospels would have been jumping all over it. Because remember, the Gospels were written in the 70s. After Josephus Flavius, or at the same time as Josephus Flavius. So if this had been in his works in the AD 70s, then the gospel writers would have jumped all over it and said, look, here's evidence. Josephus tells us all about our Jesus character. And of course, they don't do that. So it's an interpolation. And the real mystery here is not the Testimonium Flavium. The real mystery is why Barman is taking the Catholic interpretation of this particular passage. He's supposed to be the arch mythicist. So why does he believe the Catholic Church when they say this is true? That's the real conundrum here.
Is he a mythicist or is he a historicist?
I don't know. They seem to change their positions, so I'm not entirely clear on that. I thought maybe he's a... No, I don't think he's a historicist, because I don't think he thinks Jesus is a real character. That's the difference between myself and a lot of these other Roman provenance authors. So whether you're looking at Atwill or Valiant, or I think Barman as well, they all think that this is something to do with the Roman history of the Jewish Revolt. But the Jesus character was not a real character. He's like, a mythical character that's been added to. So yeah, well, I think anyway, perhaps if I had been on his show, he could have clarified this.
Oh dear. Can we clear up the confusion with regards to the king's list of Odessa? Who was the first king of Odessa?
Yeah, this is again a mystery, and I'm quite happy to say it is a mystery. Whereas these critics, they come down from on high and say, you're wrong, this is the truth. no, the truth is more nuanced than Barman thinks, unfortunately. Now, he's saying that there is a king list of Odessa that goes back into the past. So we're talking about the biblical events of King Abgarus of Odessa is all 1st century AD. But if you look at books like the Chronicle of Zuknin, there is a king list of Odessa that goes back to about, I don't know, I'm guessing 160 BC. You've got it. There you go. 160 BC. And so you might say there is a line of kings before Abgarus. But when you read it in the Chronicle of Zuknin and one or two other chronicles that mention them, it's just, this is a king, number of years. This is a king, his name, number of years. It's not a chronicle. It's simply a list of kings. So there's no history there. And then you come on to more expansive chronicles like Moses of Corinne. He's Armenian or Syriac, I say, some same sort of idea. And he says, and I quote from this, he says King Abgarus planned for a revolt against the emperor, who's Germanicus Caligula, and prepared for combat. And he built a town on the grounds of an Armenian observation camp where the Euphrates had been defended against the attempts of Cassius. This new town is called Odessa. Abgar took all his royal court and all his goods and books and archives and temple schools to it that had previously been at Medzipine. So here we have an account of Odessa being set up by the Abgrid monarchy, by Abgar V in the 1st century, which goes completely against what is given in these king lists about Odessa. And then we have another one by another author. This is by the Michael the Syrian. So we do get these, Syrian chroniclers. They are knocking around over there, and they give us a history of this region. And he says, he's saying this is about Odessa. So he's talking about Odessa. When no one was found there of the Greek race to arise and maintain the honor of the kingdom of the Greeks in Syria, the Armenians appointed someone from their own midst whose name was Abgar V, he's talking about. So again, he's saying that Abgar V was the first king of Odessa, and that Odessa really didn't exist before. It was just an army camp or something of that nature before they established this city. And so again, that contradicts this idea that there was a long line of kings of this region before that. And you note in here as well that the Armenian chroniclers often claim that the Abgrid monarchs were actually Armenian. They're always doing this. They're claiming that other monarchs actually were kings of Armenia. So I think, and this is, remember, this is not a deal breaker in the Odessa theory. It's only one component of the Odessa theory. I think that Odessa was established by King Abgar V, just as Moses of Corinne says. And that links it up very, very nicely with the story we get from Josephus Flavius about the Babylonian Jews from beyond the Euphrates who were settled in this region by Herod and Octavian, Augustus, in about AD 4-ish or something of that nature. So that story ties in very well with this monarchy arriving in this region, settling Odessa and forming a city-state. And remember, when he's talking about the Babylonian Jews from beyond the Euphrates, this family, the Odessan family, were Jews, of course. So it all sort of ties in very nicely. So I think it was a new city, but I mean, that's not essential for the Odessa theory.
No, no. Okay, did Frates V die when he left Parthia in AD 4?
Yeah, they made a big thing about this. This is they jumped on this and all started laughing and saying that, this is a deal breaker. Look, his books are wrong. And again, Barman does this quite a lot based on one piece of information. He's very black and white in his analysis of history, when, as we know, there are many nuances within history. There are shades of grey everywhere in this story. And he says, well, Josephus says that Frates died. Frates is the guy that came out of Parthia. They were kicked out of Parthia, him and his mother. His mother was Thea Museum, the queen that we were discussing before. And they were both kicked out of Parthia. And Josephus gives us the story. And Barman said, and he died. Well, I don't think he did, actually, because in my text, Josephus, he said he did not long survive, which is not quite the same thing. So anyway, we have this story of this king coming out of Parthia, settling in Odessa, well, certainly settling in Syria, but most likely in Odessa, and he did not long after survive. But that is contradicted by the what do they call it? The res gestae divi Augusti, the deeds of Augustus, which is like the last will and testament, I suppose you might say, of Octavian Augustus, which is written on several monuments around the Roman Empire. And the most famous of these is at Ankara, of course. And I've been there, of course. I've been to all of these places. I used to visit Ankara about once every month for about 5 years. That's in another life. I was doing another job. So yeah, I've been to these places and had a look at it. And one of the things it says is about this particular royal family. So this is Augustus saying that he had settled various kings in his lands. And he says that the kings of the Parthians, Tiridates, and later Frates, the son of Frates, took refuge with me as suppliants. This is the same story, because anywhere in history where we see Frates, the son of Frates, that is Frates, because that's what the name means. And Frates was the son of Queen Thea Museum. In fact, they were supposed to be married. The mother married her son. One of the reasons they were kicked out, apparently, according to Josephus. So this is a story from the Roman records that Frates took refuge with Emperor Augustus. And so he's not dead. He didn't die immediately. He took refuge with Emperor Augustus. And what I'm saying is, of course, is that this was, again, it was a story about the Babylonian Jews from beyond the Euphrates who were exiled into the Roman Empire. And Josephus gives this parallel story about them being settled initially in Antioch Orontes, but then they found them lands on the eastern borders of Syria for them to occupy as a buffer state between Rome and Parthia. Part of the same story. And that buffer state, by the geography of what's going on, by the history of what's going on, it just has to be an account of Odessa, which we've already seen was settled in the 1st century AD, because that's what the Syriac historians say. So there's good rationale behind. I mean, people can dispute this and say, yes, but I think this and I think that. Yeah, fine. I mean, that's part of history. We discuss these things and we see which is the most logical and rational answer. But yeah, don't just say he's wrong and he's making it up. No, I'm not making it up. The Ankara monument says that Frates came to Emperor Augustus. So we know he didn't die immediately.
Thanks, Ralph. Was Pliny the Elder writing about Adiabene long before Josephus?
Yeah, I've possibly a slight modification to this from what I've said in my books. I mean, things do change. Of course, more information does come in. And we might talk about some of these changes. Well, some of these, only one change really, I think. They were trying to say that Pliny was writing before Josephus Flavius, and therefore could not have been influenced by what Josephus Flavius was saying about Adiabene. I don't believe that's so, because I think they were both writing at pretty much the same time. Pliny died in AD 70 during the eruption of Vesuvius, from which we get the geological function of a Plinian eruption. I don't know if you've heard that term,
No.
but anyway, a Plinian volcanic eruption is the same as Pliny observed when he was at Vesuvius and observing what went on when Vesuvius exploded. That's by the by. But anyway, he died in AD 79. And of course, Josephus Flavius was writing about Adiabene at this very time. He was writing in the early AD 70s about Adiabene. I think they mistook the fact that all of the references to Adiabene are in his later work, the oh gosh, why have I forgotten that word? His Antiquities of the Jews, which is his copy of the Old Testament, basically. But of course, Josephus also writes about Adiabene in his Jewish Wars, which he was writing in the early AD 70s. So they were writing at the same time. So what I said was actually correct, although I may have changed my mind a little bit that the Romans did know of Adiabene, but it's not the place that Barman thinks it is. And perhaps we'll come on to that in a minute.
Okay, let's talk about the coin of Monobasis. So, as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, Ralph, but is it the book, David Hedning's book of biblical coins? He's either rejected it or just thrown it out of the book. Is that correct?
Yes. This is where you have to do real research, which I don't think Barman knows what real research is. He is saying that I'm wrong again on Monobasis and all of these people that Josephus Flavius talks about, because I say they are the kings of Odessa, mainly because the queen of Adiabene was also the queen of Odessa. Anyway, they have these kings called Monobasis, and I think they are fictitious because Monobasis is not a real name. It's just a bastardized Greek title meaning the only king. And I don't think anyone would put that on their coins, some, semi sort of made up title. And so I say basically that Monobasis is not really Monobasis. He is a king of Odessa, and he will be called either Abgarus or Manu, and the Monobasis is just a title that goes on the end, meaning the only king. And then this coin comes up, and we've got this one, and it's one coin. There is another coin that's surfaced, but they are strange coins. One of them has Adiabene on it, and no coin has the location of the principality on it. So that's odd one for a start. But he cited this coin, which has Monobasis written on it, which is not the end of my theory. I mean, of course, any theory will have one or two discrepancies, perhaps, and problems that you need to explain. And this is just one of them. So I went to investigate it. And of course, this coin is cited in Hendon's Guide to Biblical Coins, Bible of Biblical Coins. This is the book that everyone goes to. And I have to say, it was remarkably expensive as well to go, and because these specialist books are not online, it's very difficult to get them. So you've got to go and buy a hardback. So I bought the hardback, and of course it wasn't there. So I contacted the author, Hendon, and asked him about this coin, and he said, "Oh, it was only a very unimportant coin, so I took it out of the guide, the guide for coins." And I'm thinking, hold on a minute, that's and I did say to him, that doesn't make much sense. This is the most important coin in sort of biblical history, or Josephus history, if you could put it that way. This is the only coin of the people who started the Jewish Revolt. So we've discussed already, but the people who started the Jewish Revolt when the Legion of Cestius was destroyed, were the kings of Adiabeni Odessa called Monobazus and Kenadius. These are the people who started the Jewish Revolt and who surrendered at the end of the Jewish Revolt. And so if you want to know anything about first century Judaic history and the Jewish Revolt, which is the biggest event of that time, all the Jews were kicked out of Judea. Well, I can't say all because some were left. Yes, please don't write in about that because I said all of the Jews. Yes, some of them were left there. But the vast majority, 2 million Jews, and of course that's an exaggeration because Josephus always exaggerates, were kicked out of Judea and became the diaspora all over the empire. That's why we have Jews all over Europe, because of this event. And this event was caused by the king that is on this coin. And so you can see that this coin is actually pivotal. It's hugely influential. It's not unimportant. And so I didn't get a good answer on this. Why was this coin withdrawn from the book? And my only explanation that makes any sense of this is it was a fake. Because if you've been involved in numismatics, the topic and subject of coins, there are fakes that are running around all over the place. Because if you get someone, and I was down in Damascus, remember, all of these critics of mine have never been to these places. They're all writing from their mother's bedroom, like Barman does. They've never been to these locations, so they've not seen these regions and what goes on in these regions. So I was down in Damascus and we went to the souk. It's always interesting to go and visit the souk. It's like a bazaar, of course. And you have the sales souk, and then you have the fabrication souk, and they're all sort of alongside each other. So it's a manufacturing base as well as being for sales. And you see these people hammering out coins. And they're hammering out coins for the antiquities market because it's big money. And okay, you can do with it a copper coin, because this is a copper coin. It's not even anything special. It's not made of gold. It's not even silver. It's a copper coin. You can hammer out these coins and they will fetch $5. So you've got to hammer out quite well. I suppose actually if you're in Syria, that's not a page if you keep hammering out these coins. And they do this all the time. But if you can hammer out one or two very specialist coins, that might be worth $500. There is a huge incentive for someone to make a coin of Monobazus and put it out there into the antiquities market, because a lot of these that go into the antiquities market, they go into collections, and so nobody ever sees them. So there's going to be very few people until they come up for sale. No one's going to know the provenance of this particular coin.
Sorry, Ralph, to interrupt, but this reminds me of Blackadder and the holy relics that Baldric and Percy had.
Yes.
There were about 10 or 20 sets of fingers, about 7 or 8 different noses.
Yeah.
And this is classic Blackadder, surely.
It is, yeah. And it's big business. It was big business then. That's why we had the Reformation, remember. It was all about indulgences and selling of these relics. That the entire Catholic Church was corrupt. That's why we had the Reformation, the Enlightenment era, and the Industrial Revolution. It's because of the corrupt Catholic Church. And this is no different. So you do get these people hammering out these things because they're extremely valuable. If you can get a good subject that people are interested in, and of course, people are interested in the Jewish Revolt. There's a lot of people in America will pay good money. And I think someone was hammering out these coins, and this is one of these fake coins because it's not a very good coin. It's only a copper coin. It's not very explanatory. It has no dates on it. And it was withdrawn as soon as it came up for sale. It was withdrawn from Hendon's Guide. So, yeah. I mean, this is how wide you've got to take this investigation when you're doing these research into the past. You've got to do a lot of research to find these problems and these events, and this is just one of them. And it was an interesting problem because it was a stumbling block, but then the coin wasn't in the guide. So the stumbling block dissolved away.
Just out of interest, I don't know if you mentioned this, but was there a date on the coin at all?
No, there was no date on this one. A lot of them do. A lot of the Parthian coins have dates. A lot of the Roman ones do. And some of the Judaic ones, when we have the revolt coins, they will say year 1, year 2 of the Jewish revolt and so on. So you do occasionally get dates on these coins.
Okay. Right, let's move on. Was the Jewish revolt Jewish, and doesn't that exclude the Odessans?
I think have we gone over this one? This was Valiant's complaint that
I did ask you, was the Jewish revolt an internal Jewish dispute?
Yes, I think. I think that covered that particular question.
Let's move on then. Did the Odessans get a Roman tax exemption?
Yes, they did, and Valiant made such a fuss about this. I really don't know. Sorry, I'm just having a look at my notes. Again, this is a problem of arguing from a position of ignorance. Perhaps he hasn't followed my books, because I know Valiant hasn't read my books. And so unless he had been following the history of the Babylonian Jews from beyond the Euphrates, who we've mentioned before, he perhaps might not know that they were indeed given a tax exemption. But why would you argue so strongly and vociferously against me if you don't know the subject matter that you're arguing about? Why are you arguing from a position of ignorance? I mean, that's just foolish. And then, of course, all of the others join in with a bit of laughter, ha, 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 and they don't know the truth of the matter either. So, they're all laughing at their own ignorance, basically. The truth of the matter is that the Babylonian Jews beyond the Euphrates, who I equate with the Odessan monarchs because the story is almost identical. They all come over at the same time. And they were settled in eastern Syria by Augustus and Herod. That would have been Herod Archelaus, because this was just in the years AD. And the whole point of this is that they were given a tax exemption. If they were going to patrol, as it were, the eastern borders of the Roman Empire, if they were going to be this buffer state between Rome and Parthia, they wanted to be able to raise their own taxes in order to pay for their own army. I mean, how could they defend themselves if they were an independent principality and they couldn't raise their own taxes? So they negotiated this, that they would have these lands tax-free, which was quite a concession, actually, by whoever arranged this. And I think it must have been Augustus, because he has the final say on important matters of this nature. And so they became quite successful because they were free from Roman taxes and free from Parthian taxes. They could tax themselves. And so, yes, they did have a tax exemption. And this was the whole problem of, well, one component of the problem with the Jewish revolt is that subsequent Roman emperors tried to tax them. And they had these tax collecting expeditions across to the east. When they were doing these expeditions into Parthia, they were saying, and we might talk about this again later, for which some emperors were known as Parthicus, the conquerors of Parthia. Well, they never conquered Parthia. Don't be ridiculous. What they were doing, quite obviously, just a minute. What they were doing is they were moving into the east of the empire, and they were going on a tax collecting expedition to Adiabene to collect some back taxes. And of course, the Adiabenians were saying, hold on a minute, we got these lands tax free. What are you doing? And that was a part of the problem of the Jewish revolt, that this was a tax revolt against Rome because they were being taxed when they thought they shouldn't be. And that's why you get the Jesus character also mentioning the taxation, why he was friends with publicans. By publicans, they mean publicanus, the tax collectors of Rome. He had his own publicans, of course, his own tax collectors. This is why Jesus says, render unto Caesar what belongs to Caesar, but render unto Thea what belongs to Thea. And of course, his grandmother would have been called Thea Musa Aurania. It was a tax revolt because they did get this tax concession, and Valiant doesn't know anything about it, which is a bit odd that he would argue against it when he doesn't know what he's talking about.
Yeah. Okay. The next one, we've actually addressed this in 3 different videos on this channel, this question. But I'll say it anyway, just for old time's sake, if you like.
Yes.
I bet you know what's coming. Are you giving Jesus too many titles and names, Ralph?
Yes, the old problem. Yes. And I don't know what the problem is here. This is a barman problem again. He gets a bee in his bonnet. He's almost on a spectrum sometimes, I think. He gets his bee in his bonnet about a certain subject and he won't let it go. There's another one we'll talk about in a minute that he's always on about. And one of these things is that my Jesus has too many names. What he says is, I'm conflating too many characters. No, I'm not conflating too many characters. I have one character who has several pseudonyms. And I give this guy maybe, I don't know, 4 or 5 pseudonyms. And then he'll complain that actually, no, I give him, I don't know, about 20 names or something. A lot of the names I'm using for the biblical Jesus character don't come from me. They come from the Talmud and various other places. So Balaam is a well-known pseudonym for Jesus. So is Ben Pantera, Ben Stada. All of these are well-known names from hundreds of years ago, well-known pseudonyms for the biblical Jesus within the Talmud. So these names are not all mine. I make up a few more. Make up is the wrong word. I've discovered things like Bar Kamsa, another famous character from the Talmud, who is linked to this story because he was the leader of the Jewish revolt. We're coming back to the revolt era. Was known in the Talmud as Bar Kamsa, and that's obviously a pseudonym because it's not a real name. So we have these multiple names for this Jesus character, including many names that are Jesus itself. So Jesus of Gamala, Jesus Ephias, who I say are the same person. That is linked to the Jesus character as well. But the complaint is moot because Jesus has numerous names just within the gospel story alone. So if we go through the gospels, I deduce that Jesus has 34 names or titles within the Gospels, and in the English you'll just say they're titles or descriptions. But of course, if you read it in the Greek, that's not exactly how they appear. I mean, some of the ones in the Greek are, well, Christos, you'll know, of course, means Christ. Monogenes, the only begotten Son. Monosophos Theos, the only wise God. Soter, Savior. Monos Dynastis, the only king. That's a famous name from Josephus. Kyrios, Ius Christos, Agapetos Huios, Acrogonios, Alpha and Omega. Well, you know what Alpha and Omega is. That translates very well into English. Didaskalos, the master. Rabboni. Well, again, that a lot of these have come in straight through into the English, so you know what they are in the English. Emmanuel, of course, is another one. Logos, Nomphos. All of these are recognizable names for Jesus if you're giving them in the English. Things like the bridegroom, the Lion of Judah, the Word, the Good Shepherd, the Lamb of God, Emmanuel, teacher, the prophet of Nazareth, he's called. All of these are different pseudonyms or titles, you might say, for the biblical Jesus. So we know that these monarchs gathered titles, just as modern monarchs gather titles as well. I think I counted for Queen Elizabeth II, she has about 50 different titles.
Yeah.
So having a few extra titles is not unexpected. And there is another reason for Jesus having these titles, in that his name was forbidden by the Flavian emperors, because in my works, of course, the Jesus character was the leader of the Jewish Revolt. And you were not allowed to mention, i.e., not to praise and venerate, the leader of a revolt against Rome. And so Vespasian just basically said, you can't mention these names. We're deleting them from history. And we know that happened because if you go through the works of Josephus, Odessa and all of the Odessan monarchs have been deleted from the works of Josephus. They're just not there. They are only there under pseudonyms, like Adiabene, like Monobazus, like Isus or Isates of the Adiabene. So the normal names that we know for the monarchs of Odessa have been deleted. So you had to use a pseudonym. You couldn't do anything else.
Cheers, Ralph. Ralph, you said and written that the Jesus character and his family had red hair. By the woke mentality, that means you're a racist.
Yeah. And they tried that one in that video.
I found it very sneaky. The suggestion was put out there without them actually coming out and saying it. It was very sneakily done and rather typical of certain people. So how do you defend yourself, Ralph?
Yeah, well, the number one defense, of course, is that if someone is bringing out the race card, that they've lost the argument. I mean, that's the only reason they bring it out, isn't it? It's the ultimate defeat, or it used to be the ultimate defeat of anyone in an argument is you shout racist, and they all back down. Well, sorry, that doesn't happen anymore. Not playing that stupid game. This was Lambert, who for some reason acts as an uber wokeite for some reason when he's not really. I mean, he's an ex-drug addict. Why he's suddenly trying to pretend he's so woke, I don't know. But anyway, he put out this race card without knowing, I think, the history, obviously without reading my books, otherwise they'd know about the ginger lineage of these monarchs, without knowing the history again of what they're trying to oppose and denigrate and contend with. And in reality, we have a number of white ginger monarchs. So if we can do screen share again, let me just click on something here. Come on, share screen. Did I press the wrong button? It's not sharing screen for some reason. Why is it not doing that?
I'm just wondering.
Am I still sharing? Because I think you came out of it rather than I came out of it.
Yeah, I've got the previous image in the green room still.
Yes. So if you put that back up again, that image.
Yeah.
There you go. Okay, and then I can swap. I can swap image. There we go. Okay, so that's the previous image we had. So the first one we're going to look at is this one. And this is Yuya. And I'm not sure if you know Yuya, but he is the patriarch of the Amarna dynasty of Pharaoh Akhenaten. And he's clearly ginger. And we'll discuss why he's ginger in a minute, because some people say this is something to do with the mummification process. No, it's not. So it's quite likely then that the dynasty of Akhenaten and Nefertiti were ginger, because Nefertiti was descended from the same family. They were very close-knit families, as you know, with these monarchs. They all sort of interbred, so Nefertiti would have been a very close relative of Akhenaten. And he's ginger. And then we go on a few centuries and we get to this chappie here. This is Ramesses II, Ramesses the Great. And he's ginger. And of course, people have said, oh, well, it's only mummification process. No, because Ramesses was taken to Paris in 86, I think. I'm just trying to remember. I think it was 86. Anyway, he was taken for preservation because he was starting to decay. And so they took him over to the Paris forensic labs, and Professor Pierre Kilcaldy did a full investigation on him. And he determined that he was a pale-skinned man with light, wavy ginger hair. And this was real ginger hair, not anything to do with the mummification process, because you can tell from the chemicals involved. There are two types of menanin that give you the color in your skin and give you the color in your hair. And depending on the ratios of these two menanin compounds, you either get brown, blonde, or you get the ginger color. And so you can tell that this is real ginger, nothing to do with any chemicals that have been applied to the mummy. And Ramesses the Great is ginger. And if Lambert wants to contend that, he's saying that Professor Calcaldi, I'll get his name right in a minute. Calcaldi is his name. He's saying that Professor Calcaldi is a racist, not myself, because this is not. I'm just reporting this. Don't shoot the messenger, chaps. I'm just reporting this to interested parties, and I think a lot of people are interested in this. Here's the next one. This is Cleopatra. And as you can see, she is a pale-skinned, ginger-haired lady. And again, don't shoot the messenger. This is from Professor Joanne Fletcher. So if you want to contend this and say it's nothing to do with Cleopatra or something of that nature, have a word with Joanne Fletcher, not with myself. Go and accuse someone of racism over in a university. So this is Cleopatra. She's another of, and remember, all of these royal families were descended one from another. I know Cleopatra is supposed to be Ptolemaic, but it's quite apparent from the genealogy that they had married into the Egyptian royal line as well as being Ptolemaic. I mean, that was usual. It's one of the ways you could consolidate your power as a monarch, is by marrying into the established royal line of that country, the same as Alexander the Great did. And then we can continue on into the modern era, and we come across this chap. Oh, shall I make him a little bit bigger? Let's see if I can zoom in. There we go. This is Muhammad al-Yaqubi. And why do we have a picture of him? Because he's supposed to be a direct descendant of Muhammad. And as a Middle Easterner, you know, being a real dark, tan-colored skinned Middle Easterner, what does he look like? Well, he looks like a Scotsman. He's pale-faced with a very vibrant ginger beard. Yeah. So people of the Middle East do not have to be dark-skinned, as Lambert was trying to intimate, and therefore nobody is being racist. There are if Lambert had ever been to the Middle East, he would know this, but of course he's never been any further west than Carolinas in America. He's never been out of America, far as I'm aware. Perhaps he'd like to contact me and clarify that. But if I'd been on this video, of course, with Barman, we could have discussed this, but I wasn't. So if you travel around the Middle East, you'll see a number of gingerites running around. In Syria, I was estimating something like 2% of the population were ginger. There were quite a number for a very hot country like Syria. There were quite a number of people who were actually ginger. And of course, I had that meeting with this barman while I was there. No, not the barman, but a barman working in a bar. And there were two guys there. This was in eastern Turkey, so what used to be Syria, at Odessa, basically. We're at Odessa. And I said to this guy, your mate working in this bar looks Scottish. And he said, no, he doesn't look Scottish. He looks like Issa. And of course, Issa is the biblical Jesus.
Yeah.
And so the tradition out there is that Jesus was ginger. And we'll come on to this in a minute, because there's good reason for saying that, that Jesus was actually ginger. And one of the reasons for saying that is because this is the leader of the Jewish Revolt. Another gingerite. So this is a character from the Talmud. He's known as Bar Kamsa, and I do link up Bar Kamsa with the Jesus character. But even if you don't believe that, the Talmud says that Bar Kamsa, this guy, was the leader of the Jewish revolt. So he would have been one of the princes or kings. Well, no, in fact, he would be the king because he's wearing a diadema. So he's the king of Adiabeni Odessa in AD 70, AD 68. So this is King Manu, King Isus Manu of Adiabeni Odessa, the leader of the Jewish revolt. And he's ginger. And you can see he's wearing a curly side lock of hair as well, because he's Nazarene Jew. And of course, the Nazarene Jews always wore their hair long. Unlike Josephus and Saul, who didn't, these people always wore long hair and a beard, as you can see. And he's ginger. So the intimation that Jesus might have been pale-skinned ginger has nothing to do with racism, my dear Lambert. It is evidence, sort of thing that you won't know about, real evidence, real research. And if I come back out of screen share again, so if we can just drop back into normal screen, there we go, I'm back again. The other reason for saying this, of course, comes from Islamic tradition. So This is from Muslim sources talking about Jesus, because remember, Jesus was the previous prophet to Muhammad, and so he appears in the Quran on a number of occasions. And they say of Jesus, because we don't have a description of Jesus in the Gospels at all. Funny that, but they do in the Muslims. So they say of Jesus, Jesus was of average height with a red face, as if he had just come out of a bathroom. That comes from Sahih Bukhari, volume 4. One of the traditions within the Hadith of Islam is that Jesus was red-faced. A little bit like, you remember Esau was red-faced, a little bit like King David was red-faced. And now we have Jesus also with a red face. Why would he have a red face? Well, I think it's talking about like the Scottish phenotype, or the phenotype of that Yaqubi, the descendant of Muhammad, who is similarly red-faced and ginger-haired. That's what I think they're talking about, that Jesus was actually ginger. And that is what it shows on the Hakuk mosaic. And as an aside, that is an old image. That's not a recent image of the Jesus character, Bar Kemsa. That comes from the 3rd or the 4th century. It's very, very early. And it shows him as being ginger. So, yeah, I'm sorry. Oh, yeah. Yes, you're right. I actually preempted this and put the image of this character on the front of my book 5 years before this before this mosaic was even discovered. So this was a prophecy, if you like. I made a prophecy. Yeah, this guy. And I put that on the front of my book long before this mosaic was discovered. So when this mosaic came out of the ground, I knew exactly what it was, because I'd already discussed this and made this character. I got someone to paint it, actually. It's an oil painting that I made. I got this guy to I'm not a very good artist myself. So yes, that was another. And of course, they all fall about laughing, because I said that Jesus was probably ginger, when they don't know what they're discussing. And I find that very odd. Again, we've discussed this before, but if I was in that position and someone came out with some information that I wasn't sure about, I would say, well, actually, I don't know. I'll have to go and research that. I think that's the normal response, but not the response of this quartet, this little cabal of haters and dissenters who want to cancel the Odessa gospel theory for some reason. Not sure why, but they do.
Okay, there is one more image, Ralph, underneath the Hakuk.
Oh, yes. Should we go down to that one?
Yep.
This was another laugh moment on this this hate-filled video, where Barman said, "Do you know that Ellis says that Jesus was a transvestite?" And of course, they all fall over laughing. He doesn't, does he? Well, their responses rather show that they hadn't read about this, because otherwise they would know exactly what I said. So they didn't know what they were talking about, because they didn't know how to answer Barman. And they all fall about laughing and say, "Oh, that's impossible. That's impossible. It's complete nonsense." But of course, it's not nonsense at all, because Josephus Flavius says that the Galileans were transvestites. This comes from Jewish War 4-9-10. More than that, of course, they're not just transvestites; they're actually Galli, so they're castrated as well. This was the tradition of the castrated Galli priests of Cybele, and Josephus Flavius calls them Galileans. And of course, Jesus and Peter were both said to be Galileans. Luke 23:6 and Luke 22:59. They have the same title as the galley eunuchs of Judea. And from Lucian, we also read that these we have a description of these Galileans and how they were castrated. They have a little festival, and
Sorry,
they
Ralph, can you put the bishops onto the mainframe?
yeah, I
We've
can
still
do.
got the hoocock at the
Okay.
moment.
Well, I was just going to say that this might all sound a little bit daft, and hence they were rolling around laughing. But the Catholic Church still does this today. And so if we look at this tradition from the Catholic Church, we get the same imagery. So this is pretty much exactly what Josephus Flavius is describing, that the priests, the galley priests of the Nazarene and of Cybele, wore dresses. The only difference is that the galley priests were eunuchs, and I'm not sure if these two were eunuchs, but you never know. And the galley eunuchs had swords in their dresses. And again, we don't know if these two bishops are carrying swords or not, but it's entirely possible. So this tradition still goes on even today. And so there is good reason for this. I'm not just sort of making this up, as some people seem to presume. There is good reason for suggesting that Jesus was a part of this tradition because he was a Galilean. And Josephus says the Galileans were transvestite eunuchs. And the Catholic priests follow this tradition, exactly the same as Jesus would have worn. And no, this doesn't stop Jesus being a father, being married to Mary Magdalene and being a father of several children, I think. Because, of course, you don't get castrated until you actually become a priest or a high priest. And so you can be married, you can have several children, and then when you're initiated, I suppose you might call it, and you become a priest, that's when you get castrated. In the festival that Lucian describes. So, yeah, people might think this is funny, but this is real history, comes out of real history. And we should be able to discuss it like adults without people rolling on the floor and laughing about it, because it just makes them look childish, basically. Pretty much as you said. It was a very childish video from start to finish. So, do we have any more? Yeah, are we coming towards the end of these?
Questions, you mean?
Questions.
Yeah, well, there was 2 or 3 things I was going to ask you about, actually.
Yes.
Just to clear a couple of things up. The Marbar Serapion letter.
Yeah.
How does the letter mentioned? I think it was in or around after AD 73, possibly. But how does this letter support your thesis, would you say?
Yes, they were contending this letter and saying it's stupid that I align it with the biblical Jesus. But I have to say, I'm not the only one. Many theologians down through the ages have aligned this letter up with the gospel story. Basically, it's a letter from someone who's in prison, writing back to their son, and it's mentioning, among many luminaries from old, it's mentioning the wise king of the Jews. And just the way it's written and the mention of this wise king, it sounds very much like the wise king that Jesus was. And I forget the particulars of this particular letter, but there are many other aspects of this letter which line it up with the gospel story. And so it's perfectly reasonable to suggest that this was a letter talking about the biblical Jesus. Now, one of the reasons why people don't say that is because the circumstances don't fit the normal gospel story. We have this guy in jail who's obviously a long way away from his son, writing a letter back through the Roman postal service to his son. And it's a very carefully written letter. So this letter has obviously gone through some sort of censorship, I would say. Writing back to his son saying, everything is fine, we're in jail, but we're all nicely looked after and everything, you know. Don't worry about us, you concentrate on your education and all the rest of it. It's actually a wonderful, uplifting letter, but also a very distressing, I suppose, letter, you might say. This is a father who's most definitely in prison. He cannot see his son. He'll never see his son again, etc. And he's lamenting the events of the past. Things happened in the past, and we could have made different decisions, you know, but, you know, this is the road we went down and we have to face the consequences and all of this sort of business. It's a wonderful letter, actually, to read. Mar Bas Serapion, isn't it, the name of this letter? And I, of course, link it up with the gospel story because in my story, the Jesus character was a leader of the Jewish Revolt. And so this letter chimes in very, very nicely and very, very closely with this story I have teased out of these texts, because I say these dangerous rebels, because this was all to do with the Jewish Revolt. They lost the Jewish Revolt. They were taken prisoner. And I say, well, Josephus says they were taken to Rome as prisoners. And I say they were further taken on to a prison fortress in Britannia, Fortress Diva or Diva. And they were incarcerated there as prisoners and hostages to the Romans. And so in my case, in my scenario about this end of the Jewish revolt, yes, you would have a father in a prison miles away from his home base back in Judea, writing to his son about the Jewish revolt, saying, oh, it was a good cause, but, you know, we lost, you know, we have to take the consequences, etc., writing back to his son back in Judea. It fits the elements of my story absolutely perfectly, which is why I've included it in my books. But don't take my word for it. Go and read it. It's online. And it's an interesting letter anyway, even if you don't believe the Odessa story. It's a very interesting letter from a person in the 1st century writing back to his son, which gives you a taste of what life was like for someone in the 1st century, their thoughts, their hopes, their dreams for the future, etc., etc. You can see that things haven't changed very much over the last 2,000 years. So it's interesting from that perspective, even if you don't believe the Odessa story.
Okay, great, Ralph. Let's finish this video and focus with King Arthur. So as I understand it, what you're saying about King Arthur and Jesus is basically a parable or a retelling of that story. It's not supposed to be meant literally that Jesus and King Arthur were the same person. This is a retelling of the story, and it was told in secret, wasn't it? Basically, or it was told, it was covertly told, basically, if that's the right way to put it.
Yes, no, that's a very good description of it. This comes from Barman again, and as I've said before, he's very black and white with no greys in between. And so, if I write about a connection between King Arthur and Jesus, and I sort of do say the same person, but he's obviously completely misunderstood what I've said, because as you said, he sort of indicates that the Jesus character had to be reincarnated into the 6th century to become this Arthurian character. And so he came back to life as King Arthur. And I'm thinking, what planet are you on? And I thought he had misunderstood this, but he wrote exactly the same to Professor Robert Robert Price.
I think he's deliberately, misunderstood what you've said.
That might be true, because, putting it across to someone like Price and trying to convince him that I was stark, staring, raving mad, because I had made Jesus resurrect into the Dark Ages in Britain. Yeah, that sounded deliberate to me. Yeah, it sounded, as you say, it sounded deliberate that he was trying to denigrate me. Because I don't say that at all. As you said in your brief introduction there, it's as far removed from what I actually say as you could possibly get. What I'm saying, as you said, is that this story was retold in the Middle Ages, in about the Templar era, basically, the 1130s AD. This story suddenly comes from nowhere because there is no history. We don't have time to go through this now, and I think we've talked about this a little bit already, but there is no mention, there is no Arthurian story before Monmouth and Oxford in 1135 AD. And suddenly you get this entire story of this Dark Age king suddenly arrives in Britain all at once. And it's come back from the Crusades. Quite obviously, this story has come back from the Crusades because it occurs just like 30 years after the Crusades. Suddenly you get this story after these people have been to the Middle East. Remember, the first crusade went to Odessa before it went to Jerusalem. So they had access to any of this information that was over in Odessa. And I think they came across this story that we've been discussing, the Odessa story, that Jesus was a king of Odessa. So he was a warrior monarch who started the Jewish Revolt. He wasn't a pauper prince of peace. This is the information that I think they came across. And what to do with this information? Because it's supremely heretical for this era when, the controlling authority in all of the lands of Europe was the Catholic Church. And they had complete control over everything and everyone, and were quite happy to burn you at the stake if you said anything that was heretical, as they did to the Knights Templar, as they did to the leader of the Knights Templar when he was. The Knights Templars were all destroyed in 1307, Friday the 13th of October, 1307. And then Jacques de Molay, who was the leader of the Templars, was slow roasted. He wasn't even burnt at the stake. Just to make it even worse, he was slow roasted on a spit a few years later. That was the sort of punishment you get for telling this sort of story, for writing my book, Jesus, King of Odessa. If you wrote that book back in the Middle Ages, you would be slow roasted. So what can you do with that information? I think they made up the parallel Arthurian story, because no one's going to slow roast you for talking about a semi-mythical king of Britain who lived in the Dark Ages. Monmouth and Oxford were condemned for being liars, of course, because some of the following historians, like Newborough, said it was a load of rubbish and they had fabricated the whole story, which they sort of had in a way, if you think about it. So a lot of people didn't agree with it. However, you're not going to get slow roasted because of it. And so that is what I think they did. They created this Arthurian story as a parallel story of the secular Jesus rather than the spiritual Jesus, who was a king of Odessa. And they just recast him into this role as the Arthurian character. Now, that is obvious from anyone who has read my books. That is perfectly obvious, because I must say it on 100 occasions going through this book. Remember, the book itself is like 600 pages long. And so I say this time and time again throughout this book. This is my book, The Grail Cipher. Very interesting book it is too. So to try and confuse that with me saying that Jesus had been resurrected in the Dark Ages is either a total miscomprehension. It's either someone who's never read the book, or it's a total miscomprehension because you're not very clever, or as you said, that this is maybe deliberate denigration.
It's a deliberate distortion. It has to be, and that is just so unsportsmanlike, I suppose we could say, couldn't we?
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
just very, very, very disappointing. Anyway, let's end on a something nice to talk about. Let's go into the Holy Grail was brought to Earth by aliens.
Ah, yes. Did they
Yeah.
mention that as well?
They did right at the end, and of course we got the high pitched laughter with it as well. So perhaps you'd like to explain it to us.
To finish on that note, yes.
Yeah.
You come across some very interesting things when you're going through Arthurian legend. There are not many people who have explored Arthurian history because it's vast. There are
Yeah.
numerous manuscripts.
And there are some very odd stories within it. Like, was it Pompey fighting with pirates and the
Yes.
floating island?
Yes.
All sorts of things you think, what has this got to do with King Arthur? So
Yeah. So we have the complete history of Pompey the Great, his introduction of Mithras into Rome. We have the floating islands, the magnetic floating islands of the Mediterranean that used to float around the Mediterranean, which is all based on truth. The Pompey story is actually very true. It's not made up. As far as I know, everything in it pretty much is true. Although it was said to be a secret history of Pompey that he said should never be divulged. He told his executors in his will never to divulge this information. About secret information about his war against the Pontus pirates of the Mediterranean when he was made the admiral of the Mediterranean, which is true. I mean, we know that from history. And the floating islands, it has similarities with Greek legends about floating islands, and it has great similarities with what we know from real history and the eruption of Santorini, Thera, because Santorini was such a big eruption and the piles of pumice are so big, they're 60 meters thick, that these chunks of pumice would have sailed off across the Mediterranean. And so that story, however unbelievable it is probably true as well, except it goes back into about 1600 BC. So this is a venerable story that's come out of deep history, and it's included in Arthurian legend all of a sudden for no good reason. These knights go off on these crazy tours. They find a magical boat, and this magical boat will take them into different eras and different locations. So it's a fun book. But all these crazy stories do seem to have some sort of history behind the mythology. And one of those semi-mythological, historical type stories is about the Holy Grail. And as we don't want to go on too long about this, do we? But anyway, just very quickly, what is the Holy Grail? In Arthurian legend, we get a number of explanations. So it's the Sancharial, which is the chalice that held the blood of Jesus. So we're looking at the biblical story again here, which was used during the procession around the round table. It's the Sancharial, which is the royal blood. And again, we have this from Arthurian legend, where one of the new knights is being initiated into the fraternity, and they parade the Grail in front of him. And they say, "Can you see the Grail?" And he says, "No, all I can see is this princess carrying a green cloth." And of course, all of the other knights fall about laughing, because yeah, it's a trick, of course. I mean, they love these little tricks. The Grail is the princess because the Grail is a bloodline, and therefore they're just tricking this guy. But then if we go into Parsifal, we find that the Grail itself is a sacred stone. And I do a big passage on this in 3 of my books, I think, in King Jesus, King of Odessa, and the Grail Cipher, where I build upon this story as it grows and grows and grows as I've managed to research more and more of it, and had the Arthurian input as well. So we have this sacred stone, which started off as the Benben of Egypt from Heliopolis, and it went up into Greece as the Omphalos stone of Greece, and then it went across to Parthia as I think it was taken there by Alexander the Great, but anyway, it went to Parthia. It's on all of their coins, so we've got images of this thing. It was in Parthia for a while, then it came back to Odessa. It was in Odessa. Maybe one of the reasons why Odessa was so important, because they had the Holy Grail, as it were. Then it went down into Syria, a bit further south into Syria, where it became known as the Elagabal stone. And again, we have images of it in the temples, on their coins and so on. And then Emperor Elagabalus took this stone to Rome, where it became one of the cult objects, one of the primary cult objects of Rome. It disappeared after Elagabalus was murdered. Obviously, he was named after his Elagabal stone. It just means the mountain of God, basically, the Elagabal. And we don't really know what happened to the stone after that. The religion that went alongside it became Sol Invictus. So that became influential as well. So we had this story about this sacred meteoric, because it was supposed to be a meteorite, meteoric stone, which runs through history. And if you read Parsifal within Arthurian legend, what it says is that the other manifestation of the Holy Grail is it was a sacred stone, a sacred meteorite. And of course, a sacred meteorite does come in from the heavens. It's a fiery body, a bit like the fiery phoenix, a piece of the sun that's been cut off the sun and has fallen to earth as a big fiery projectile through the sky. And if you're lucky, you can go and find the rock that caused this and venerate it, as obviously some people did. And it just so happens that within Arthurian legend, that presumably that stone, because Wolfram von Eschenbach links that stone with the phoenix. And if you look at the coins of Syria and if you look at the coins of Rome, that stone is embossed with the image of the phoenix in exactly the same fashion. Now, I can't see any way that Eschenbach would have been able to see any coins from Syria and Rome. So he couldn't have mentioned that through looking at the coinage, that it was linked to the phoenix. So there must have been an ancient tradition that this stone was linked somehow to the fiery phoenix. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to mention it, which is why I think it's the same stone as the Elagabal. And therefore, what he is saying is that the Elagabal is the Holy Grail. Now, that's the history. You can take it any way you like. I really don't know I don't care what you do with that history, but that is the history. And I think I'm going to have to cough again, excuse me. That is the history. And as a historian, I give you the history as it's given in the text, and you can make of it what you will. But it's there. There is no point laughing at it. It's there as real history. So yeah, I was not impressed. Like you, I was not impressed with this little exercise where they had a hatchet job, basically trying to take me down, because we'd already had a hatchet job just the week before. I'd done a video with Senlac,
Yeah.
which was supposed to be about King Arthur.
Yeah.
He had actually given me a book to read to do a review of this book, of this Arthurian book, which I was glad to do because I hadn't read this book before. It's an old book from the 19th century or the early 20th century, written by quite a respected lady who had written this book on the history of King Arthur. So I happily read it and was going to do this review of this book on this video. And then the video was nothing to do with King Arthur, and it was a hatchet job on the Odessa theory, where I was not allowed to speak during pretty much the whole of the interview. That was a takedown, or an attempted takedown. And if anyone's never been in this position, it's actually very difficult because my mind was on King Arthur at the time. My notes were on King Arthur, so I had no notes to go on at all. It was all from memory. And I had to defend this barrage of accusative questioning. And the best example of this I can give, which is absolutely hilarious, is if you go on to YouTube, and you probably you know what I'm going to talk about now.
I think so,
If you
yeah.
if you watch Jordan Peterson versus gosh, what was her name? I'm thinking. The Channel 4 presenter. Oh God, what was her name? I've forgotten.
Fiona Bruce.
No.
Sorry, Ralph. I'm not big on the TV. TV names.
No, well, I'm not either. I only found out about her because I looked at this particular video. Anyway, I'm sure people can look it up. We can probably put it in the comments below this
Sure.
below this film, below this video. But anyway, Jordan Peterson went on to this Channel 4, so it's a big TV company in Britain, to have this interview with this lady, and she attempted a takedown, basically. And she was at him all the time. In fact, many people have memes all over the place now of, so what you're saying is, because all she said throughout this whole interview was, so what you're saying is, interrupting continuously and trying to get him to say something anti-woke about women, because he was discussing, a lot of the film was about women's rights and women in the workplace and all of this sort of business. And she was trying to get him to cross some sort of social line, say something wrong so he could be cancelled. And she was at him all the time. And he's a consummate debater, so he sidestepped every question in a very professional manner, and it's absolutely hilarious. But the problem is that interview and my interview had nothing to do with the truth. She was trying to take him down. She didn't care about his views on women in society and equality and all of that sort of business. Because remember, this guy is a professional psychologist. He's read all the literature. He's giving all of the information direct from the real literature. And he's very adept at saying the right phrases and the right words. But she was going to try and take him down. So she wasn't interested in any kind of discussion about women or truth about society as we find it in the current era. And the same was true of my interview. It had nothing to do really with the Odessa theory. It was a takedown. And if I had got myself muddled, if I had said the wrong things, I could have been taken down. And of course, if you take me down, you take down the Odessa theory. So then you've got to ask yourself, is this an attack on Ellis, or is this an attack on the Odessa gospel theory? I don't know the answer to that. Comments underneath, please. If people want to discuss this, please comment underneath what you think the agenda is. But there is clearly an agenda here that they want to take me down and therefore take the Odessa theory down as well. Kathy Newman. I knew I'd remember. I knew I would remember. Kathy Newman versus Jordan Peterson. And there are several online. So try and choose the Channel 4 one, because several people have, as it were, plagiarized this film. Because the Channel 4 one, I think, has 85 million views. That's big. That's big. That's how many people were interested in this. And of course, many people have stolen little bits of that film because, you know, they'll get 1 or 2 million views on anything to do with Kathy Newman.
Ralph, I have to say that one of my favourite moments on that particular interview you're talking about with Neil was his elementary geography. That was
almost fun, wasn't it?
It was almost embarrassing. There I was rooting for you, and I was completely unaware at the time of what, you know, you'd been promised you were going to talk about King Arthur, and had basically been set up. And then he tries to say something about, was it the Crusades, wasn't it? It was the Crusades, yes. And he was getting the place of Odessa and where it was on the map completely and utterly wrong. Yes. And I actually found myself cringing at one point, thinking, "What are you doing? What are you saying?"
He thought Odessa was on the coast, and therefore it was on the route of the First Crusade. And of course, it's not on the coast. It's 300 kilometers from the coast, and it's east of the Euphrates. That's why Josephus calls them the Babylonian Jews from beyond the Euphrates. It's across the Euphrates. And of course, he didn't know this. And so he's trying to pick it out, as you say, on these maps, somewhere on the coastline, and he can't find it. And I keep telling him, you know, you've got to look inland. It's not there. You've got to look at. No. I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell you. And he gets another map up, and he can't find it there either. And I said to him as he was doing this, "You've never been there, have you?" And this is the trouble, you know. I've had these people saying to me, "Oh, I've got the manuscripts. You can do the work at home." No, it's a nice idea if you can actually go out there. And of course, I've toured Syria 3 times. I used to live in Turkey, so I know Turkey very well. I lived in Turkey for 6 years, for God's sakes, you know. I know the country in that region, so I've been to all of those places. And if you had been to those places, you would know that Odessa is across the Euphrates, because you've got to cross the Euphrates at Zaguma, I think, that is the crossing point in order to get there. And like you, I could not believe this little scenario that was going on, because this must have gone on for about 5 minutes or something, you know, searching for this place.
He was absolutely determined to prove you wrong on that.
He was.
Thinking, what are you doing? Anyway, sorry.
But why would you want to prove somebody wrong about a topic that you know nothing about? Clearly, he had never looked up Odessa and researched Odessa. He never knew where Odessa was. So why would you want to challenge someone who's written a 600-page book on Odessa, on the location of Odessa, when you don't know anything about what you're talking about? Why would you have the ego to think you were correct and the person you're talking to is wrong? I don't understand that. I mean, I would defer to someone who knows that subject. I might challenge them if I knew something about the subject, but if I didn't know anything about that topic, I would defer to them and say, "Show me where it is." But that's not what he's doing. He's working from a position of ignorance yet again, and trying to teach me where this place is. It was beyond bizarre. It was utterly childish. Yeah. But okay, there we go. That's the sort of people we're dealing with.
Yeah.
And they are the sort of people who are trying to cancel the Odessa gospel theory. And you've got to ask, why does someone want to do that? What is the agenda? And I hate to use the word agenda because it sort of means there is a conspiracy to come to some sort of conclusion, which I have no real evidence for. But when you get 4 people into a chat room who are desperately trying to take down a particular theory, you've got to say, well, what is the agenda? And I don't know the answer to that. So again, comments below, please.
And how many
What do
times has
people
this
think?
happened? How many times now has this happened?
Oh,
So many
several.
times, over and over and over.
Over and over again.
It's getting more and more desperate as well, you know.
Yeah.
So, Ralph, that was a fantastic response. Shall we stop it there before you lose your voice? Yeah.
Yes, indeed. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm getting this problem with my voice.
Okay. Just one last idea. I mean, would you be open to the idea of having either Neil or Derek or even, dare I say, Jacob or James Valiant on the channel, on this channel, to discuss and debate? Or
I
we
don't know
pass
whether we could, because A, it would end up with an argument, not a discussion, as Senlak has already proven. He said that, we'll have another discussion and I'll give you much more time. And then, of course, he didn't turn up for the interview. So I have no great trust that that would ever happen. And then I don't know if you were reading some of the comments under the video where Barman said, I would never discuss with Ellis because I would only be rude to him because I have no respect left whatsoever for him. And you're thinking, well, how can you discuss anything with a person like that? Even if I wanted to, it's just going to, the discussion is going to go south immediately. And so you're not going to get a rational debate. The guy is off his rocker. He's got an obsession about this because he looks like one of these sort of obsessive type peoples. And I think this is just one of his obsessions. I'm going to get... Sorry.
I was going to say, I think you've hit the nail on the head there, actually. Say no more on that subject. I was quite disappointed, having watched James Valiant several times online on various channels, sink to their level. Surely a man of his age experience should know better.
Well, absolutely, because Valiant is a good researcher, or at least I thought he was. And I thought his book was great. Discovering Christ or something. I forget what it's called now. But anyway.
Creating Christ.
I shouldn't really be advertising it, should I? But I thought it was a good book, and I thought he was a good researcher. And we had a fairly good rapport on the first time we had a debate together. And I thought that was all hunky-dory. And then he suddenly went very negative. And I don't know why. And I don't know why, again, he would want to argue from a position of ignorance. He should be clever enough to know that he should argue on the points that he knows, because his knowledge is fairly extensive. He's got a good grasp of the Roman provenance theory. But why do you want to go arguing elements that he's never researched, like the Odessa, like almost the Adiabeni, because I don't think he's researched them very much. Why would you want to pontificate on subjects you don't really know about? And then just as an aside, I wish he would shut up sometimes. He tries to dominate every single conversation and take over the conversation and talk over everybody. So sorry, Valiant, you would be much better if you let someone else talk and then give your opinion afterwards and not just talk over everybody. That's my personal view. So yeah, could I do a talk with any of these people? I don't think I really could. I don't think it would work. And to be honest, I think they've lost my respect as well,
Good. Yeah, good. I think there's a feeling amongst at least some of your followers and supporters, Ralph, that this whole situation has just become futile, really futile now. There is just no point to it. There's never going to be any change on either side. And the longer it goes on, the nastier, I suppose, it gets, at least on their side, So, I wouldn't blame
Yes,
you at all.
it got very nasty on the last time this occurred, when I had this cabal of Mormons and fundamentalist Christians and whatever were again doing the same thing. Another quartet who were trying to take down the Odessa theory, and they got very nasty too. And again, we got these strange conundrums in these people. One of them was a devout Mormon who is the official translator of biblical texts for the Mormon Church. So he's fairly high up in the Mormon Church, obviously knows his stuff. He is a historian. But then I challenged him on the Book of Abraham. And I don't know if you know the Mormon, the dear old Mormon Church, but it was set up by Joseph Smith, who was a Mason. He was a Freemason. And
I didn't know he was a Freemason. That's interesting.
Oh yeah, that's why it's very Masonic. All of their initiations and so on are very, it follows Freemasonry very closely. He found some Egyptian texts in a traveling circus that was going around America. I kid you not. So he bought 2 mummies and a few scrolls. One of those scrolls, an original Egyptian scroll, written 3,000 years ago or whenever, I don't know, he said was the Book of Abraham. And he interpreted, this is before anyone knew anything about Egyptian hieroglyphics, he translated it into English as the Book of Abraham, because there was an image of someone trying to, as it were, possibly kill someone on this bier. And so he said that was Abraham trying to kill his son, which is a part of the gospel story, of course, not the gospel, the biblical story.
Yeah.
So he said it was the Book of Abraham and made this big translation of it. Of course, later on, when they found this document in later years, it transpired that it was an Egyptian Book of the Dead. Nothing to do with Abraham. So his translation is a complete and utter lie. It's a complete fabrication from start to finish. Nothing to do with Abraham whatsoever.
Wow.
So I'm saying to this guy, McClellan, okay, well, if you want to criticize my work, what about the Book of Abraham then? Because he is a Hebrew translator, Aramaic translator. He's a historian. He knows in his heart of hearts that this book is an Egyptian Book of the Dead. Would he admit it? We went around in circles and squares and more circles and more circles. He dodged and dived and ducked and weaved. He would not admit that this Book of Abraham was the Book of the Dead. And this is the problem you get with some of these people. They have preconceived ideas, either because, I don't know, they have an obsession with something, or because of religion, normally because of religion. And this guy, most certainly it was because of his religion. And they cannot let anything override their original preconceived ideas, like this being a Book of Abraham when it's not. And you end up with schizophrenic people because they're saying one thing and knowing another. How do you live with yourself in your own brain with these two, this enormous great dichotomy between the real world and what you have to say to maintain your belief system? How do you do that without going mad? How do you lie to yourself? How do you lie to other people so willingly? As a trained historian, as a professor. In fact, I think he was a doctor, not a professor. How do you sit there lying to yourself? But unfortunately, people do this, and I've seen it time and time again. And we've seen it again, I think.
I'm sorry, Ralph. Sorry, Ralph. I've got to stop there because my battery is about to snuff it, unfortunately.
Okay. Yeah.
We're 2.5 hours in. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
That's a pleasure. The response you've made is a fantastic one. Please like, share and subscribe, everyone. We'll be back with another video in the very near future. Cheers, Ralph. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.